Hi, thanks for joining me for Worth Following Weekly, your 5-minute mentoring on the skills, tools, and tips to become a better leader at home, at work, or in your community. I'm Mark Legvold, the lead consultant at Roots to Sky Consulting. Remember when you were a little kid and how much you loved being read to? Even when I was teaching elementary school kids, I remember how great it was to look up and observe them when I read aloud from a book of choice that day. They'd relax and allow themselves to be transported into the book, identifying with the characters and the plot. After we were done reading the story, I'd usually tie it into the theme of the lesson that I was teaching, since I taught science, and their level of understanding was increased. Tying the story was said to be the conceptual glue for the students. Now, how many times have you been talking to people you lead, or even your boss, your spouse, your kids, and just wish they'd just get it? Saying it louder and slower doesn't help. Sometimes you're missing the conceptual glue. A well conceived story can help. In fact, it can make you a more authentic leader, add clarity and relevance to what you're communicating, and key, build emotional connection within your team. Leading law enforcement people is really, really hard work. They spend long days alone, struggling with the potential dangers of their job, as well as the care for those they serve. They have extraordinarily strict policies that must be followed to keep their communities safe, and their decision making skills are constantly taxed. They balance uncertainty within life and death situations and hypervigilance. It is a world constantly on a psychological edge for the people who serve. They also have lives out of uniform, just like us, that wear on us. One young man who was on the team I was leading was slowly losing his dad to cancer. The struggle wore on him, and we spent a great deal of time just talking. He shared his stories about his dad and what was going on in his dad's struggles. One of the days that we didn't work together, he came in late for his shift, and his supervisor, who was in charge that day, didn't like how the young man reacted when informed of his tardiness. In fact, the rules we had required me to document the tardiness and the young man's reaction. So the next shift that we shared, I met him at his work area and we discussed not only the rules, but the why behind them, what he was required to do and why. I also made sure to let him know how important he was to our team and that I had a belief in something much more important: organizational grace. My belief in organizational grace, I told him, meant that I would have a conversation with the middle manager, his supervisor, about the need to have good relationships within the team, not just rule following. That we don't just use a broad paintbrush to apply a policy to all, but we treat each person as the valued member of the team that they are. We take the time to understand what's going on in their lives so we can rely more on that relationship than the regulations. This isn't a story primarily about that young man losing his father. It's a story about the value of grace in individual relationships within the workplace. You see, rules and regulations exist in a world where relationships cannot be relied on. This story gave me the chance to teach someone that relationships, especially in a career where we all rely on each other for our safety in fluid situations, really do matter. So, working on relationships and seeing their importance is key to our daily work. Storytelling, like so many leadership skills, takes practice. So here's something to work on this week. Pick a normal, everyday object you find in your workplace. It could be a paper clip if you work in an office, your work boots if you primarily work within the trades, or your hockey stick if you're a pro hockey player. Think about how you would tell a story using that object that helps build relationships on your team, in your office, or on the job site. Practice becoming an authentic, effective communicator who builds the emotional connections by telling stories. If you're leading a group, I'd like to challenge you to try this at your next meeting. Add an element of fun and creativity. Hand someone a stapler and ask them to tell a story that includes the stapler that ties to becoming a more effective leader. You'd be surprised. Who are worth following are able to see the leadership lessons in the stories that surround them. Leaders who are worth following bring the conceptual glue to adhere the concepts of positive culture with the people. Next week on Worth Following Weekly, I'll expand a little more on the emotional impact that you can achieve in storytelling to powerfully inspire the people you lead to see you as a leader who is worth following. We'll see you next week.